Sometimes you're going to need progressions of anything that you're doing. So you need progressions of the exercises that you're doing, if it's a main exercise or if it's an accessory type of exercise. There has to be some kind of progression built in. Usually isolation type movements, you don't want to start them with explosive intent. You want to make sure it's a full range of motion. If you can contract the opposing muscle, so if it is a dumbbell curl, if you can contract the tricep, that's going to actually create more stretch in the bicep. There are two questions that came up regarding HIIT training, high intensity training, and I kind of love this in a way. So that first question is, how would you recommend a 40 plus guy that has been bitten by the iron bug to move forward and get as strong as possible before it is too late in terms of age? There is some context that is missing here a little bit, but I'll go with what we have. So, and I don't even know if context is going to matter here. And this is kind of interesting because this was a topic that Josh Bryant and I talked about yesterday, which is kind of weird saying this right now, because I don't know exactly when this is going to post. And I don't know exactly when Josh's podcast is going to post. So it was recorded yesterday. I'll just put it that way. That was recorded yesterday, and obviously this one's recorded today. But that was one of the topics that we discussed towards the back end of the podcast. And it was when he brought it up, his suggestions for that. It was interesting to me to notice that context didn't matter. So some of the same considerations still kind of apply here. So things that he said and some of the things that I added, basically I really didn't add because he covered pretty much everything that there was to cover with that, is, what is the training objective? Like what are you training for? That's going to kind of be a big pivotal role into what all this is. And then maintain your mobility. And we've talked about this in past crew casts as well. Not maintain your mobility on the way that most people think today, because they're thinking all these mobility drills and all this other stuff, because that's typically what they see. What we're talking about is just basic joint mobility. So if you're looking at being bitten by the iron bug, and I'm not sure what that means, that can be, bodybuilding, it can be powerlifting, it can just be trying to be strong as hell. Whatever that is, as you're pushing heavier weights on certain things, movements are shorter than what the range of motion of the joint typically can be. So on the front end of the program, those movements probably should be there. And then on the back end of the program, you need to do something to maintain that full range of motion for the joint. That doesn't necessarily and should not be necessarily done explosively or with as heavy as possible. It should be done with intent. And as Josh and I talked about, and I've talked about before many times, on those type of movements that you're doing, if it's say a chest fly or a dumbbell curl or a tricep push down, usually isolation type movements, you don't want to start them with explosive intent. You want to make sure it's a full range of motion. If you can contract the opposing muscle, so if it is a dumbbell curl, if you can contract the tricep, that's going to actually create more stretch in the bicep. Then from there, isometrically contract the bicep and then initiate the movement with the muscles. I've always liked to say, in some cases you train movements, in other cases you train muscles. So initiate the movement with the muscle. Then after the initiation phase and it starts moving, then you can apply more force, you can accelerate, whatever you want to be able to do. But after that initial phase, then go through that and then get that full range, peak contraction, whatever you want to call it. So a lot of things are happening there. So you're going through the greatest range of motion. You're developing a better mind-muscle connection, which is going to help with pretty much everything later down the line. The second factor I want to put in there would be conditioning. You want to maintain your conditioning. It was funny because Josh said yesterday, it's all cool, until you get over 2 hours per week. And I don't know very many people are going to be doing more than 2 hours of conditioning, steady state cardio type work per week. So maintain conditioning. By that, what I'm saying is some small minimally effective dose of steady state cardio of some point. If it's walking, which is usually what it's going to be for most people, then that's what I would make that and keep it a vital part of the training. The full range of motion I put in there. Sometimes you're going to need, you need progressions of anything that you're doing. So you need progressions of the exercises that you're doing, if it's a main exercise or if it's an accessory type of exercise. There has to be some kind of progression built in. But the older or more beat up, so let's just say the more beat up that you get, sometimes you're going to have to put in some type of regression based upon how long you want that cycle to run. And by cycle, I like to talk in waves. Other people will talk in mesocycles, or blocks, whatever that is that you want to be able to run that movement consistently. 3 sessions, 4 sessions, 5 sessions, whatever it is. Certain exercises are going to be harder to be able to run for a longer period of time, because the progression, if all you're doing is adding weight, you're not going to be able to add weight anymore. So in some cases, and I find this true, the older lifters get, they may need some type of slight regression before that movement will go in. I'll give a couple examples here. If I'm doing heavy strength work in the singles, doubles, or something like that, say a max effort exercise, if that's what you want to call it. If I put that in there and I'm going to use a Mars bar typically for me is one that I have to have a regression in there. Spider bar, I kind of need a regression in there. I would also call that like just a week to get reacclimated to what the movement is. So that week isn't going to be trained with a lot of effort or intensity if you're speaking percentage of a 1 rep max. It's just going to be, let's get used to what this is. And then that build, if it's a 4-week phase that I want to build through, and I know after 2 weeks it's going to be a bitch, that makes that first week really not even count as far as the accumulation of fatigue. So it's more of an accumulation of skill to be able to develop the motor pattern and the coordination to actually move towards the accumulation of the fatigue. So that never used to be a problem when I was younger. And I don't believe it's because my skill was better. My skill is probably better now. So I think now it's more of a problem. Actually, I don't know why it's more of a problem now, to kind of put it out there, but it is. I've also noticed with getting out of that heavy work and getting into the higher repetition type of work, not super high rep, say you're getting into the 5 to 8 rep range. I'm able now, probably because I'm weaker, but I'm able now to be able to stretch those exercises out more training sessions than I would have been able to in the past. In the past, maybe I'd have 3 bouts that I would be able to use that session, then I had to kind of change it out with something else. Now I can actually run it for 4 or 5 bouts and still make progress. If it's a weird number, like 5, and I operate in 3-week waves, then I would like it to be 6. And just from an organizational standpoint, it's easier for me to kind of lay things out. Then I'll have a regression type of week in there, but I don't need to get reacclimated on how to do a fucking close grip Smith machine incline press. I just lower the tempo tremendously on that week 1, sometimes even on a week 2. And then as week 3 comes, then the tempo comes back to what I would call my normal rep tempo. And then I use that for the next 3 weeks there. So I pause when I say older athletes, because I think this has to do with training age, and there's other factors that kind of play into that, and just training cycle wise. When you think of the progressions, also think of that can also be regressed back to be able to move through there. Outside of that, the biggest thing is to make sure that the training stays phasic. You if you do heavy work, become more skilled at being able to define what happened, right? So I'll use some examples here again. So if I go back to a squat and it's a heavy 1 to 3, if you do that session, and then after you do that exercise, then after that exercise, you feel like, oh man, I worked hard, it was good. And then you proceed with what the rest of the shit that you have planned for that day is. If it is something that was way harder than what you thought it was supposed to be, and that was the decision that you made. So as you're working up, you kind of will know that beforehand, and you have to think and you have to process a little bit. So if you're working up on that heavy movement and outside of 3-week waves, even if it's a longer wave and it's an 8-week wave or wherever it is, you know what this week is, and you kind of know what you want to do on that next training session with that movement or movement pattern, or however you're structuring that. If as you're working up here, you have to always keep in mind what this next week's going to be, because essentially what you're using this week for is to prepare yourself for this week, right? Because each week's to prepare yourself for the next week until a block changes or a phase changes onto something else. So it's a preparation process. So at a certain point in time, if this gets to a point where it was hard and you feel like it did what it was supposed to do to be able to progress you forward, then that next set is going to be a ball buster, and you're going to have to, push way harder than what you typically would. And that's going to impact how that next session is going to go in a negative way. Then you probably need to back down, because that next week matters. If all you ever did was back down, then you're going to inhibit the next week as well. So there's a balance with that. So it's called optimal training. If you fuck up that balance, then the first recourse from that is you probably need to cut back on everything else that's going to be done that day to make it easier for you to recover from that bout of training. If it's super hard, then you may have to cut back on other things that you're doing in the week before that next training session happens as well. So that processing and that thinking becomes more important the older that you get, and also the stronger that you get. So there's another variable in there as well. As you get stronger and stronger and stronger, even when everything feels good, the ability to recover from that bout is going to increase. And it's okay to put in recovery sessions and things to help you recover from things like that if it does go a little bit sideways, because that kind of keeps you on track. But if you're always putting in those things to keep things on track, then long-term wise, you're going to run into a problem. This is where it goes back to the organization of training, is what is the objective through this phase that you have, and then how are you going to get there? Basically, yes, just exactly that. How are you going to get there? And everything should progress up to that. So being a little bit more cognitive on those decisions, and then the impact of those decisions. I'm not telling you that you can't fucking go ape shit crazy and do that. I do that. Most people will do that because it's fun. That's part of what you do. But if that happens, you have to be accountable for what that was, on how you're going to be able to recover from that moving forward onto the next thing. This is actually a good thing. And it's a good thing to learn even if you're younger, because usually where you're going to look is how was the progression set up? So how is the training set up first off? That's the first place you're going to look. The second place you're going to look is, why did this feel like shit? And you might look at your sleep, or you might look at, my nutrition has sucked. So indirectly, this becomes a way to be able to pay more attention to things like sleep, recovery, nutrition, hydration, because those can be factors that are also creating this problem, and factors that are going to help with the recovery moving forward. Number 2. This is the one I've been looking forward to. There are 2 questions that came up regarding HIIT training, high intensity training. And I kind of love this in a way, because for years I've been saying it's coming back. It's just a matter of time. It's coming back. And this is probably the longest I've seen it go, because it goes, when you're talking just the bodybuilding hypertrophy work, there's a cycle to this that will go from I don't like the word intensity, so I'll get to that in a minute. But for now, let's just say high intensity training. So there's phases that will go through the popularity of high intensity training, which is essentially just low volume. So low volume, higher effort training. And that will go for a period of time. And then people switch. And then they go more into higher volume training. John Meadows, the last time it kind of moved from that high intensity, was positioned in such a way that actually was able to kind of benefit from everything coming back to the high volume, because a lot of the people that were doing the high intensity hypertrophy work started doing the higher volume work and realized, holy shit, I'm making all kinds of progress I never thought I could make before. Or, holy shit, this doesn't fucking destroy my joints the way that this other stuff was doing it before. And then over a period of time, years, it goes back to, oh, this high volume work is just a bunch of junk volume. It's a bunch of wasted energy. And if I just do this stuff, then I'll make better gains. And then people will start doing that and they make better progress. So if you go back through bodybuilding history, and I can kind of lay this out here in a second, you'll see how these phases how they come and go. And there's usually names that are associated with the phases. So if I go back to, I think I structured these in the right type of order. You go back to Arthur Jones, right? 'Cause that's kind of where it all started. So you have Arthur Jones, Casey Viator, and Mike Mentzer kind of fell in there, kind of in that time period as well. And there was a couple things going on with that. So there was that high intensity. Here's why I don't like the intensity, because to me, intensity represents a percentage of a 1 rep max. In the strength world, that's kind of how you look at that. In a bodybuilding world, and even a CrossFit world, it's kind of looked at effort. So there's a distinction in what both of those mean. So my brain still has a hard time kind of wrapping around intensity being associated with effort, because there's decades of conditioning in my brain from that. But that right there, though, creates a lot of confusion, and it can create a lot of finger pointing from one camp to the other camp, because just the different use of the same word, where there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you know what the context is. So you may have seen in a lot of podcasts that I have now, I will ask people how they define that, what that means, just so I'm on the same page. Volume's kind of another thing that's like that as well. So I need to know what that means, then I can have that conversation. It's rough though, because the audience doesn't necessarily know that. So they're not too sure what volume really means when somebody is speaking about volume, because they're going to use what the context in which they've learned that from, and then apply that. And the first thing I would suggest is to try to nail down what context they're speaking about. So with volume, for instance, to me, I look at that as sets times reps. Like, what is that volume in there? And then the question with that becomes, do you count anything under 40%? Because now if you're it sets times reps, but you're counting fucking leg swings and shit like that are done in warm-ups, that it's, doesn't really count. So it's anything under that 40% or 4 RPE or whatever the hell you want to call it, really just kind of goes into a different section as far as how it's being looked at. So going back to Arthur Jones, this was also associated with Nautilus and trying to sell more equipment. So it was kind of coupled with that. I can kind of say, in a way, you could say that the reverse hyper is kind of coupled and associated with conjugate in the same way, kind of. So there is a connection that's there. At that time, I think that connection was very intentional. With things like the reverse hyper, I don't believe that intention was intentional, right? So those are factors that need to be considered there as well. But it was very popular, you know what I'm trying to say, then. And I have all the books on all this shit too. So I've read all these things since this was coming out when I was doing HIIT training in a way when I was in high school off season for my powerlifting. And then Edgar Ellington, I always say Edgar Ellington Darden, has a lot of books on HIIT training as well. I believe I have all of them. And he's got a lot of articles as well, I believe, on T Nation that were after the original books that he had. I still think the original books are a little bit better with the work that he had out there. And then that pulls in Mike Mentzer. Now on the other side, so that's on the bodybuilding side. Now in the strength and conditioning world and in the powerlifting world, you had people like Ken Leistner that was more kind of in the powerlifting world, but also the strength and conditioning world. And then there were strength coaches like Kim Wood, who was with the Bengals for a very long period of time, and Ken Manning, who was, I could be wrong because there was another strength coach I wasn't able to find and remember, but it was one that I did a very short internship with at the University of Toledo when I was there. And I do believe it was Ken Manning, but I could be wrong. And that was HIIT training. So they were using the same HIIT training philosophy in the strength and conditioning world for athletes. And then as you move forward, here comes Dorian Yates, so then it kind of died out. Not really died. It never has gone away. Let's just put it that way. Never completely gone away. But then Dorian Yates kind of actually did repopularize that. And then on the back end of that came, and some of these people kind of get pissed when you say what they're doing is HIIT training, because they'll say it's not HIIT training, but the principles associated with HIIT training are where their focus was. And Dr. Scott Stevenson, which was fortitude training, he would kind of fall into there, as well as Dante Trudell with dog crap training would kind of fall into there. And if you look at the programming that they did and go all the way back, you can see the similarities of what all that is. Now in a way, you can say it's kind of being resurfaced, or it began to start to become resurfaced with some of the research on reps in reserve, effective reps, and all those other things. And so what we're seeing now are, shorts and reels of Mike Mentzer from the past, which one of the things I kind of jokingly say, I'm not, as I continue, you'll see I'm not against, this type of training protocols. I'm not against that. But one of the things I'm kind of jokingly saying right now is there's always been somebody that's kind of on the forefront, a figurehead per se, that's out there. Well, the figurehead now is like a dead guy. All respect to Mike Mentzer. I mean, he should have won the Olympia that one year he was in that. I don't want to go down that road, but look up the stories behind that and the controversies behind that, and you'll be able to see. But when I'm seeing these reels, and it's like reels of shorts and stuff like that, of Dorian in his prime talking about it, or Mike Mentzer talking about it, and Tom Platz in a way kind of talking about, which is kind of weird because he was more of a high volume guy, talking about that. It's for it to become repopularized, they have to use dead people, so that's intriguing to me. But I'm trying to be as respectful as I possibly can be. And that alone to me is like a clue, because I see the same things that a lot of other people will see, where people will ask me about it because they saw, or they'll ask me, hey, what do you know about Mike Mentzer? And I'm like, Okay, yeah. Is a great bodybuilder, intense effort, right? Intense training principles kind of went back into there. But where some of this becomes fuckery, right? And where the biggest controversy comes between that, and there's another question about West Side, or Conjugate, which I'll touch on a little bit later, is I don't think anybody would really give a fuck if they weren't trying to promote these things as the best, such as, hey, if you're doing high volume work, it's just everything that you're doing outside of that is just junk volume. You're wasting your time. None of that shit matters. The only thing that matters is this, because this is the best way, right? And there is no the best way. So that's where the criticism kind of came from the very beginning. And that's where the criticism is coming now. And as it reinvents itself and kind of goes away and then comes back again 30, 40 years from now, it's going to be the same shit. It's going to be somebody coming out saying, this is the best way. Everything else that you're doing is just a fucking waste of time. On the flip side of that, on the high volume side, the same shit happens. So it happens on both sides. Like, this stuff is worthless. This is the best way. So if you don't really know the methods and the principles that are behind all of this stuff, then those people who see that this is the best way start questioning, is what I'm doing correct? Or is what, better stated with this audience, is what I'm doing not as optimal as if I was to be doing that, right? So the back and forth and the debating comes because the statement of the best, or that this is much better than something else, which the longer you're around, the more you realize there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, right? There's a lot of different ways to get strong. There's a lot of different ways to get fucking jacked. There's a lot of different ways to get bigger, all those things. Anybody that doubts that is a fucking idiot, because you can just look at the people who are the best and see that they all got there a lot of different ways. Where the charlatans will say, well, you can't look at those people because they're the genetic outliers. You have to look at all the other people, which you just so happen to not be able to see because they're not posting shit and putting stuff out there. So it becomes a very good marketing tactic as long as that is popular in what it is. When you start to peel back and look a little bit deeper into a lot of these different things. So I'm going to stay on the HIIT training where all right. So I already touched on the fact that the word intensity becomes that factor. So if I'm going to stay in the strength and conditioning world, say it is Ken Manning, Kim Wood, and I could not find the website that used to be Cult Central for HIIT training. I can't even remember what it was, and it kind of pisses me off because I should know, because it was, well, I want to say Cult Central. It was also one of the best places to go because that's where they were citing all the research to back what they were doing. It was all kind of put into all the articles that were on that page and the forums that were on that page. If anybody listening to this knows what that is, please put it in the Discord group, because it's driving me crazy because I can't remember. I have to assume that it's still somewhere archived, but it might not be. And for the same reason that our old training logs and Q&A is really not out there anymore either, is there's a cost associated with keeping millions of pages of content up. And if there's no visitors to it, it really doesn't have any value. And it's just an expense, but it may be out there. And I would love to be able to go back and look at that. A lot of Ken Leisner stuff you can find through, I think his book is The Steel Tip, where he has all of his articles that are put together in that one book. If you look into the strength and conditioning side of this, then outside of Leisner, because that was powerlifter, so I'll set that aside for a minute. But when you're dealing with the strength and conditioning coaches and they're working with football players, athletes outside of just the pure strength realm, there's a big part of me that can understand why coaches leaned into it. When I interned, I could not understand that. Not at all. Because I was younger, I was a power lifter, it was all linear periodization and a little bit of block at the time. Made no fucking sense to me at all. None. Like, why is all this shit being done on machines? But when I look back at it now, it's like, what is the goal of those athletes? The goal is just to get stronger, right? And their strength and conditioning is essentially their GPP. So now this provides a way that basically they're going through a full body circuit almost. There's the rest periods are definitely in there, but a full body circuit, of 10 different machines or whatever it was. Because this is basically what I had to do, is run people through that, bust their ass, like 1 or 2 warm-up sets, and then get to the top set, bust their ass on that. And then there was always some kind of intensification protocol associated with that. I'll get to that in a minute as well. So when you're looking at the time allocation of what that takes and how to be able to run through a group, and you have the financial resources to be able to have those things in place, from the average sense of trying to get through a large number of athletes in a short period of time, getting stimulus to the muscle to be able to help develop that hypertrophy and strength, then I can kind of see how that falls into there. But what you don't know is what else is being done in that, because it is strength and conditioning. So there's other things at the Bengals, for instance, and with Ken Manning, for instance, there's other things that are being done. There's other, I don't want to say skill work, but preparatory work to be able to help their skill work better onto the field. So looking there, that makes sense from that standpoint. And it makes sense to where how it would be implemented, because it was in my high school. I assume that's how I was associated with that, because there was all Nautilus in there. So that was kind of the first thing, is that's what it was. It's also the reason why I only did it for certain time periods of the year. So I'm hesitant to criticize because I'm indifferent on how that is. Pure strength and conditioning coaches will lose their fucking mind about it, because some of them are getting into the specificity shit, which isn't even specificity because it's still GPP for what they're going to have to do onto the field. But there's a break in there between that and then what's going on with the hypertrophy work. So that has to be kind of noted as well, is how much of what they're doing in the weight room actually has any dynamic correspondence or transference to what's happening in the field. In the bodybuilding sense, the trade-off looking at that compared to the other usually ends up being how much cardio they're going to have to do, because now we're looking at calorie expenditure. So if the time in the weight room is going to be less, 20 minutes, and the work or volume is going to be less, there's going to be less of a calorie expenditure that kind of goes into that, which is usually, if they're dieting for a show, is going to be made up with cardio. One of the reasons why a lot of people really loved the approach that John, and he was not all a high volume guy, by the way. There are programs that he has that falls more into the lower volume, higher effort as well. There's a reason for that. So, but one of the reasons why a lot of people loved when John's higher volume approach became more popular is they found they didn't have to do hardly any cardio, if any cardio at all. Well, the calorie expenditure in the weight room is now way higher for that. So when you're looking at trying to create a calorie deficit, it's kind of being made up there. Now, when we get into some of the other factors that become hard to define is when you look at failure, which a lot of this is based around, is how do you determine what that is, right? Even today, it's kind of like, what exactly is 100% if you're talking about a percentage of a 1 rep max? And I've talked about this before. If you break a PR, but there might have been 30 more pounds you could lift, is that truly, really 100%? If you missed it, it's obviously not 100%. So failure becomes even more of a fuckery when you're trying to figure out what that is, because if you use a little bit slower tempo and then you go to failure with that, is that failure? And with a lot of the people that are proponents of the reps in reserve, or not the reps in reserve, but the effective reps and all the other stuff, then what's the purpose of anything that's past failure, right? So when they're quoting things like Menser and Dorian and going back to all that kind of stuff, everything that they did was to not being able to do another rep, and then some intensification method, if it was strip sets, partials, rest pause. There's a number of different intensification methods that could be in there, or combinations of some of those. It could start with, the strip sets, and then as the strip sets come down, then it's a rest pause. Then after the rest pause, it can be static holds. Anybody that's been through a train your ass off has seen, many different intensification methods being thrown, into that one set for that. So what that creates this hard to define definition of what exactly is failure, and then what intent is allowed to be used for that. Are you allowed to be psyched up, or you're not allowed to be psyched up? Are you allowed to break form and use momentum or cheat reps to be able to push that further? So that becomes all encompassed in there as well, which is where some of the other debates come into all this kind of thing. And I'm kind of going through notes here because I kind of went back and forth with this with a few other people. And so the thing is, the best I went in there, the science-based, evidence-based questions. All right. Then the other one was the metrics. What are the metrics that are being used to be able to determine the success? Where a logbook is typically associated with that, to where here's the movement that you're going to do, then you need to either lift more weight or, oh, my brain just died, do more reps, something to be able to beat the logbook, right? Where that's going to be possible for X number of weeks before that's not going to be possible. Normally what will happen with that is it will start out a little bit more strict, and then over a period of, actually, if you want to go back to, if somebody that's a beginner or low intermediate, then they're going to make progress from session to session, just because they're going to become technically more efficient on how to do whatever that movement is, even if it's a machine press or whatever it is. So there's going to be that first initial success just from that. Then they're going to be able to get a little bit stronger. And then they're going to start to figure out things like, well, if they lower faster, push faster, find ways to chop reps, shorten distance, stuff like that, to be able to kind of get through there. Is it effective? Is it not effective? None of what I'm trying to say here, that's not really relevant. What's relevant is, what is the metric that's being determined to know, is this actually moving them closer to what the objective is, or is it not? And that's where a lot of these things fall short. Because if we're talking about muscle hypertrophy, putting more muscle on, and then how do they know that? And what metric is being used, and what period of time does it take for that to be able to happen? And in some cases that's there, in most cases that's not. So where I'm going with this is trying to explain, when these things surface, you're going to see pros and cons, right? the pros and cons or the debates or the this is best or this is not best usually all revolve around the things that I just put out there, right? Which isn't exactly everything that's going on there. What needs to be looked at is how can this be applied over a longer period of time? And where would it be applied over a longer period of time? So if it's, a bodybuilder trying to add muscle mass, these can be different phases to where if they're not making progress, their muscle mass, lean body mass is not increasing. Or if they just want to gain weight, even if they just want to gain weight, there still has to be an increase in lean body mass. Otherwise, you're just getting fucking fat. If those are not increasing over a long enough period of time, then they probably want to shift into a different modality, if that's what you want to say. And then just being this different stimulus is going to reactivate, I guess you could say, the growth and the progress that they didn't have because they've at that point become desensitized to whatever it was before. If all you do is high volume work all the time, then you basically get in shape, you become sensitized to what that is. Then the volume becomes more and more and more. And then at some point in time, it just can't become more because you don't see very many people today doing double split training sessions as they were doing in the 70s. Well, that's just an expansion of adding more volume, adding more volume, adding more volume. And oddly enough, it was around that time to where this original first hit kind of came in, at least the original first that I know of that's documented. I'm sure you go back further, there's probably something even before that. And so then that comes in, then they start pushing harder, to that failure or past failure. They're not sensitized to that. So then they have to adapt. Then when they adapt, they're starting to grow from there. So with all that in mind, where then do I fall when it comes to the HIIT training? I like to take things apart and say what methodologies, what intensification principles, what training principles per se are being used in this program. The same thing with strength. What are the loading protocols that are associated with this? What motor abilities are being trained in what specific orders and stuff like that. When you break that apart, then you can see here's what these intensification methods are. Can they be applied, conjugated, I suppose you could say, coupled into other training programs throughout the whole year? So then for the purposes that you're looking to have. I don't know if I'm really answering this question very well or not. So if somebody's looking to implement it, let's put it that way, and it's hypertrophy only, then yeah, you can go through whatever block, right? So now I'm going to say multiple mesocycles. So you can go through several mesocycles of this and just throw it in. And that change alone is probably going to create stimulus that you didn't have before. Fine. Then flip it to the volume. So essentially what they're doing, or what you would be doing then, is periodizing the hypertrophy training, which pretty much anybody that's been around for any period of time that's read enough shit on all of this is going to realize you want to periodize the hypertrophy training because of the sense of, being sensitized and desensitized to the stimulus. If it's somebody that's on the strength side of all that, as I've talked about before, when you look at a training day, you have certain exercises that fall in the training day for specific reasons. There are outliers, of course, but there's for the most part, the main movement is the first movement. And then the secondary movement is more of the strength movement. And then when you get down to the lower end of a training day, you're dealing with things that are just hypertrophy based. Now, at that point in time, you can use these type of intensification principles HIT principles, if you want to call it that. You can use those to be able to put them in there to probably get more out of the accessory work that you're doing than just grabbing some shit for 3 sets of 10. So that can have a greater return when periodized, right? Because if it's always in there too, then you're going to become sensitized to that as well. So my takeaway with it is it's good and it's bad, right? High volume is good and it's bad. You know, any of these things, max effort work is good and it's bad. There's risk benefit associated with everything. And you have to weigh that risk benefit and then balance that throughout what the training day looks like, what the microcycle or the training week looks like, and what the phase, you know, or mesocycle looks like, and weigh that risk benefit. And then where the risk is going to be needs to be on the things that are the highest importance. But even with that, you still have to be weighing the risk benefit of all that to be able to yield the greatest results. What you don't want to do is to have everything associated with that training day, that microcycle, that mesocycle, or that block all falling on the high risk side, because it's not going to work. Well, it might, right? But the cost is going to be very high, and it's probably not going to be repeatable. And if it does work, you just got lucky as fuck for that. And I would say it's just poor program organization. All right, done with that one. I could go on for fucking an hour on that. Probably a stupid question, but I have been around 210 to 215 this summer, and I would like to bulk back to 225 to 230 this winter. Any tips on doing this and not feeling like crap? Health-wise, I feel okay. My blood pressure is a little high. I'm 54 and 5'10". If you try, can you keep your conditioning up while bulking? Any tips? Okay. Coming from the no bullshit side of what this whole fucking podcast and Discord and everything is all about, if you're 54 and your high blood pressure is a little high, I don't know if I would be fucking considering bulking. I think the first thing I would be considering is keeping your conditioning at a point to where the blood pressure can go down, because you don't want to fuck with blood pressure. So it's with that, it would be, as I just said, with the risk benefit ratio, what is the benefit of you going up 20 pounds and your blood pressure going up that's associated with that? What is the benefit of that? I don't know, because I don't have the context of that. You know, what is the benefit of that? And are you okay with accepting the risk that could be associated with that, which would be pushing the blood pressure even higher, making it harder for you to recover, right? So usually the answer isn't going to be increasing weight by bulking and trying to buffer that increase in weight with more conditioning. Not at 54. If you're 24, probably would have a different answer with that, but at 54, no. So I would probably lean more towards, you can go into a slight calorie surplus, you know, to build muscle. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't have to be a huge calorie surplus. So 100 calorie. First off, do you know what your calorie level is at first? That's the most important thing. Like, what is your maintenance caloric level? And there's apps and shit to help you measure that. I would use the apps to help you measure that, and then just using somebody's fucking formula that they put out and say, take your body weight times 10 or whatever it's going to be. That's all fucking guessing. Even if it's going to be right 60% of the time, it's still guessing. It's not that fucking difficult to track your basic calorie intake over a week using an app to see where your basic calorie level is. The only thing I will suggest with that is don't change how you're currently eating because you're logging things in an app. And the likelihood that you will change things because you're logging in an app is very high, right? Because just that, taking the time to be able to put that in there, you're going to make different decisions than you typically would make if you weren't doing that, or you may not log things that you don't think about to be able to put in there. Avoid that at all costs. Just eat the same fucking ho-hos and shit that you normally eat, put it in there, and see where your basic calorie level is. From that point, what I would do is look and see where the macronutrients are. You know, where is the protein, where's the carbs, where are the fats? Protein's the most obvious one there. See where that is. In most cases, with most people I know, that might have to come up a little bit. What's the magic number? I don't give a fuck, right? If it's under a pound of grams of protein per body weight, and I even think, personally, I think that's high if you have carbs. If you don't have carbs, different answer. But if it's there, you know, or slightly under that, then it's probably enough, assuming that there's carbs there. If it's way, way under that, so if it's how you're 210, if you're bringing in 75 grams of protein per day, which could 100% be possible, then I would try to bring that up while keeping the calories exactly where they are now, and just play with the macros a little bit to be able to have protein in there to be able to help you to recover and help build muscle, essentially lose fat too, you know, from that time period, and then maneuver from there. Then from there, you can increase 100 calories per day. There's many different ways you're going to increase. I'm just going to tell you the easiest way. Some people increase 300 calories every third day. It basically, if you look at it over a period of a week, is there going to be that surplus over that period of time? I would go from there and then slowly increase it over a period of time as that comes up through, instead of just saying, I'm now going to go into bulky mode and I'm going to eat another meal per day and I'm going to just add a bunch of other shit in there to be able to get there. To be able to put on 5 pounds at 54, to be able to put on 5 pounds of lean body mass in a year that's a hell of an accomplishment. That is a great accomplishment, right? So this 210 to 230 in a short period of time, 100% is going to be water for the majority, fat for the majority, and muscle will be the minority of that. So at 54, I would suggest that it slowly be something to increase lean body mass over the period of time. And then that would be that bulk. The reverse of this would be, you know, leaning out. So like I said, there's calorie apps now. So when I had to do this shit fucking 30 years ago, I had to write it down I had to have a fucking book and look at the labels and write all the shit down. And it was tedious and it was a pain in the ass and it took a lot of time. That's not an obstacle anymore. There's fucking free apps to be able to do this. So that's what I would suggest with that. When testing out a new training method, what's a reasonable amount of time you should spend consistently working on it before making a judgment? Should you include a peaking phase or a test? Other considerations to account. Depending upon how you're going to define training method, I think I kind of fall more in line with what Joey Smith said on the podcast. If you're really serious about trying to figure out if a training protocol is going to work for you, the reason why I'm pausing is because all training protocols are linear, all training protocols are somewhat conjugate, and all training programs are basically block, which is why I've suggested for 2 decades that people study what block is, study what linear is, study what conjugate is, and to some degree study what, you know, HIIT training or bodybuilding protocols are. Study what they are independently, Because if you do that and you spend enough time studying all those things, you're going to see, and then eventually they all come back to me and say, now, wait a minute, these all are kind of linear. They're all blocked. So they come to that conclusion. So I'm taking the assumption that that hasn't been done. And it's, here's this template that you want to work from, which is going to fall within one of those domains. How long for you to figure out if it's successful or not successful? I'm going to say a year or more. And the reason I say that, and the reason why I would agree with Joey said it was, he feels a year would be the minimum. The year I say that is because you have to be in it long enough to be able to figure out how to regulate it, to be able to accommodate what your own individual needs are. Before that, a 12-week on one thing isn't going to really be enough, because usually all you're looking and all you see with that, in most cases, and not all, but in most cases, it's just a peaking protocol. So then you're not seeing anything that's done after that peaking protocol, which is in the off season, which has been a reoccurring theme on the podcast as well, that the off season is actually more important than the peaking protocol. So if all you do is the peaking protocol that's associated with whatever system that you're talking about, then it isn't really that system. It's a piece of that system that's based upon what happened before that system was implemented. So for that full thing to come into play, you're going to be looking at a minimum, of 24 weeks just to kind of get through a full macro cycle, I would say. And most macro cycles, I would say, are going to be longer than that, but usually through that full macro cycle. And then that's still just going to be the first time through. So this is where you can run into the issue of what I would consider, and a lot of other people consider, program jumping or program hopping. You go from this one to this one to this one to this one to this one. I guess that could effectively work if this one was made more for peaking and this one was made more for off season, this one was made more for something else, but then it's not really that system. So then it's the different things that are associated with that. So the quick answer is to say probably a year or two. It's not the answer people like to hear. That's why I like to elaborate on the context behind why I'm saying what I'm saying. The other thing with that is, if you stay with that for a year or two, then you're going to start to understand the sequence of how things should flow throughout an annual plan. Then from there, you'll be able to better assess, is this working or not working based upon where you are in that sequence of that plan. Most people will go and just jump from peaking phase without knowing that's what they're really doing. Peaking phase to peaking phase to peaking phase to peaking phase. And then if they fall within a certain window of their training age, it's going to work no matter what they do. When they get outside of that window of their training age, that becomes a problem, because then they don't know what to do. They don't know how to manage things. They don't know how to, what I would call, auto-regulate from that. So that would be the answer with that. If you could go back and rename max effort method and dynamic effort method, what would you call each of those to avoid the misunderstanding and misapplication caused by the internet? Well, you're never going to avoid the misapplication and misunderstanding caused by the internet, the same way you're never going to avoid the misunderstanding and misapplication of before the internet, when it was just articles and stuff like that. So the internet hasn't created anything new that didn't exist before. It may have actually shortened the time frame for the people to be able to really get a grasp of what things really are. Because when you're going from an article or just talking to the biggest dude in the gym or talking to somebody on a telephone or something like that, the gap between education hits is further apart. So, but to answer the question, I would probably call it the max effort work. I would probably call that heavy grinding work, and that kind of fulfills, if it's going to be a single, a triple, it fulfills that you need to grind, with the weight. So it's going to have to be heavy. And then for the dynamic work, I would probably define that as explosive intent or fast intent, and then that, to be able to have that fast intent, then the load is going to have to be a little bit lower, because it's harder to have that fast intent, or it's harder to develop that fast intent. If you already have that fast intent, yeah, you can compensatory acceleration, that kind of where that falls into there. But for a lot of people, they can't really grasp what that is, because if all it is, heavy maximal weight, then it's really hard to have and develop that sense of what that intent is. Now, heavy grind is a more simple term, so it's a little bit easier to understand heavy grind if somebody lifts weights than max effort. Dynamic effort is, I don't know if fast intent is an easier explanation of dynamic effort than, yeah, it probably is, than dynamic effort, but that's probably how I would do it. I mean, it's the easiest way I ever saw this explained was at a seminar I did with Jim Wendler eons ago. He explained it as, on one day you go in and the basic goal is to, then on the other day it's, and that was it. That's the easiest way that I've ever saw it explained. So, and it actually worked for the people that were there. So that's, if I was to do that, that's what that would be. Next question. How important is it in taking a higher rep exercise, higher reps than 5, to a true RPE 10 during a training block? It's a risk-benefit thing, and it depends upon experience, right? So this is where things like, when I see a question like that, the thing that comes to my head first are things like AMRAP sets, right? And so, and Wendler has them in 531. Other programs have AMRAP sets in there as well. That was something for a long period of time I didn't like at all, because I was looking at it from the view of a more experienced lifter, and it didn't make sense to me, because if you were really doing the sets of 5 in the RPE or present range, that the sets of 5 are, say, effective sets of 5 that are going to really help develop that strength. And then you're going to have, a third set with that same weight, and then do more than that. I didn't physically see how that could even be fucking possible, because for myself and people I've trained with most of my life, the third set of 5 would have probably not been fucking possible, because of the energy that was expanded into the first 2. So, and that would make sense. The more experience, the higher the training age, the better the technique, the better the efficiency, and all that plays into that. So I had a really hard time understanding how somebody could do 5, 5, and then on their AMRAP 12. Then I started to realize that we're talking 2 completely different people as far as their efficiency, their technique, where their training age is, their strength, skill, and all those associated with that. Then I started to see it more as kind of how in a way, kind of one of the benefits of Conjugate is you have a better idea of knowing where your strength is in any period of time if you're getting stronger, because somebody in a lower training age is going to probably get stronger over, you know, a 12-week period of time than what a lot of the linear periodization models would call for. So say that linear periodization model is going to say use your 1RM. So you're using that at the beginning of that for the 8s or wherever it starts. And then at the very end of that, you know, the goal of that might be able to finish at 105, 110%. So 10% increase. The way that I would see that is a negative is sometimes just technical changes alone, timing, efficiency, bringing up weak points can put way over 10% on somebody's 1 rep max fast, really fast, you know, sometimes in a day, you know, especially at that level where it seemed ludicrous that you're going to wait 12 weeks to be able to see if that actually goes up or not. When you have that AMRAP in there, and then all of a sudden you're doing 10 with what your calculated 5 is based upon some rep chart that's out there, then all of a sudden you realize I'm no longer a 350-pound squatter. Based upon this 10 rep max, I'm now, say, a 375-pound or 400-pound squatter. So it's a way to kind of gauge, you know, where the success is in more real time as the program moves forward. So I started to see those things a little bit differently, because at that point, this can become and is a KSI, you know, a key strategic indicator to be able to allow the coach or lifter to be able to know if they're actually making progress or not, right? So now with those type of things become associated rep records. Like here's my 10 rep record, here's my 6 rep record, 8 rep record, 5 rep record, whatever it's going to be. That falls into that. And to take that and equate it to something that's more, you know, on that conjugate scale, that would be what different max effort exercises are. So to answer the question, how important is it, would fall on to, is it being used in that sense that it's being used as an indicator to be able to judge where the strength is in regards to the program? Because let's say on that AMRAP set that, you know, in 1 week, that rep record ends up being 8 with said weight. And then the next time that comes around, that rep record with that same weight is 6. Well, then you need to really start looking at different things in your training program, maybe even outside of the program, rest, recovery, sleep, to be able to get back to where that rep record was. You're also going to look at things such as, what did you do before that AMRAP? What were the warm-ups? What were the extra work? So it's a way to make somebody, if done properly, and I think this even happens more at a subconscious level as well, it makes them analyze the habits and the behaviors of what they're doing within the training program a little more effectively than if that was not there at that certain level. You know, as somebody becomes stronger and stronger and stronger, then that really is not going to become the best indicator. But at said time, with a lot of people, that can become that indicator if they know that's what that is. I'm interested in thoughts on building muscle quickly while still progressing on the main power list. For context, I'm 46, I'm 5'10", 210 from 185. When I started lifting 3.5 years ago, I'm thinking that I need to put more size on to keep progressing. Yes, it's probably true. Interested in programming, but also technique, habits, and practice. This week, Tom Shepard sent me a helpful hypertrophy video, which was a good start. Yes, watch the video that Tom made on hypertrophy training. That is definitely a good start. If you're going to go through, if you're interested in technique, and it is on squat, bench, and deadlift, and you're going through a hypertrophy phase, and your technique is not optimal, you can still go through a straight hypertrophy phase and work on technique. It may not be the technique of what that technique is with 80, 85, 90% bar weight, right? So it may not be the technique associated with lifting maximal weights, but for a lot of people, just the barbell technique in itself is a problem. So if it is somebody that's only got a few years experience and they're going through a hypertrophy phase, what I would suggest there, if technique is something that they're really concerned about, is on the front end of their training as their warm up, or, you know, after the warm ups. What I'll have some people do in this case is they'll go through a general warm up, which is basically just abs, low back, glute, shit like that. So a small circuit, just more so for the mobility that we were talking about a little bit earlier, and just kind of get moving and to get the brain into the idea that they're going to train today, and then move into a technical session. And then the technical session would be squat, bench, and deadlift with a lightweight. You know, I'm actually looking at a board right now for somebody I have this written out for, which is, you know, 95 pounds for, I believe it, and you can progress this however you want. It's a light fucking weight. You just want to make sure every repetition you do is perfect, right? So I like to start, if I have people do this, which isn't often, to be completely honest. So you got to be talking to somebody that is really trying to reinforce the technique, because they don't have enough repetitions under the bar for that. I'll start it at three sets of 10, which I don't think is optimal at all, because they lose focus after 4 or 5 reps, just to develop the habit, because it's easy to go through 3 sets of 10 of a squat, bench, and deadlift with 95 pounds. It's the fucking warm-up weight. It's not that big of a deal. But what's not easy is for them to focus on the intent of making sure that each repetition is perfect. Actually, to step back, what the hardest for them to do is just do it, right? Because they want to come in and train. So they do the warm-up, then they just want to go to the main training. So just having them do it, you know, for 1 set of 10 or 2 sets, whatever it is, just to do it is the first step, you know, is to develop the habit of just doing that. And then starting at something that's they're kind of cognitively used to, like everybody's used to 2 sets of 10 or 3 sets of 10. And then from that, breaking it out into more sets with fewer reps. So it's from there, normally I'll go to something like 6 sets of 3. The rest doesn't have to be very long. It's 95 pounds, but every repetition has to be perfect. And this is every time they come in the gym. So if it's 4 times a week, then yes, they are squatting, benching, and deadlifting 4 times a week with 95 pounds, maybe 135 pounds, but they are practicing the technique of that lift every single time. If it's not let's say they are doing one of those lifts as part of the training day, well, then that lift in that technical block of that training day, it just becomes the last lift of what it is. So if they're going to squat that day, and I normally have squat, bench, and deadlift, then it's going to be bench, deadlift, squat. Then they're going to use those first 6 sets for the technical reps as their first 6 sets, and then work up from there. So the technique can be developed during those blocks. I mean, just because it's a hypertrophy block does not mean that you're not going to do the technical work that's going to be associated for you to get better. In a lot of cases, just throwing this in alone with that light weight, for a lot of people, they're going to come out of that hypertrophy block way better skilled at those main lifts than had they not done it, because they've never spent the time just trying to do perfect reps. And that is the only goal of what they're doing during that time period. You know, in sports, this would be called practice, by the way. And then from there, move on to whatever the hypertrophy block is. In your table talk with Dr. Locke, you seemed uninterested on working on shoulder mobility. What changed your mind to convince him to do the mobility and the strength? Well, you noticed that one. Yeah, I was completely not interested at all in any mobility type of work for my shoulder, for the reasons of the way that I see it is however many years it's been since 2000, 20 years. So it's 2003, 2004. So yeah, 20 years. So it's been 20 years since I was told I had no other option but a shoulder replacement, and have had it looked at twice over those period of time, and it's still the same thing. So I have really no desire on making it better, because I've learned to live with the limitations that I have with my shoulder, to the point that they're not really limitations. There's just some shit I can't do. I can't grab a squat bar. You know, I can't use that arm to grab something off the top of the refrigerator. I'll use the fucking other arm. I mean, there's ways to work around all that. The pain management is fine. You know, I can deal with and live with the pain management that's associated with that. What I'm not going to be, because I've gone through this with both of my hips, I know where this goes. You know, and I don't know how many degrees I'm away from being where that becomes like the hips were, where I could not live with the pain management associated with that, because it was 24/7. It never went away and I couldn't sleep. So I have no desire at all, looking at a risk benefit ratio, of doing anything that could even have a 1% chance of making it better. You know, so even if there's a 99% chance this will make it better, but there's a 1% chance it's going to make it worse. By making it better, I'm able to fucking grab something off of the refrigerator and maybe grab a squat bar. I have yoke bars, right? I'm not interested in what that 99% better looks like, because it's fine. It's manageable. My life is great. I have no issues with that. Now, that 1% chance of it being negative, if that means it's going to be in pain 24/7, then I'm put in a position to where I have to be able to get a complete total shoulder replacement because of that. Now I'm fucked. I don't want to take that chance, because the success rates that I've seen on shoulder replacements are fucking terrible. And now that changes everything associated with how I train. And I've been able to mitigate this for 2 decades. So to me, that 99% to 1%, that 1% is fucking important to me, to not risk that. So that's the reason why I've avoided anything like stem cells, all the different therapies that people presented out there, all the different options, like fuck that. No. And I hope this helps to explain, you know, why I'm just fine with how it is. What changed my mind with him was he approached it from a different angle as everybody else. You know, everybody else is looking at internal rotation, external rotation, the ability to get my arm back on a squat bar, you know, all these different type of things. He approached it as being able to, you know, put my hand in my back pocket, which I still have no real fucking need to do that either. But the one thing I've always kind of joked about, and I don't do anything to be able to put myself in this position, but if I'm ever to get arrested for whatever reason, or somebody ever wanted to fucking grab my arms and handcuff my hands behind my back, I am fucked. That's now that 1%, and is going to fucking destroy me. So that little tiny bit of motivation, that's why I made the joke during the video that, well, at least now if I'm handcuffed, I don't have to worry about getting a shoulder replacement. So that's what intrigued me with that. So with that kind of being the goal there, and yes, we can try to work this way. This is not, it's very little effort. It doesn't require any time. It's twice a day. It's not a big fucking deal. Now I had to regress back from the band that he had me use, because at first, I was joking because my lats were pumped all the time. And then after that, my lats were sore all the time. And then it was starting to impact, and my shoulders were starting to get really sore, from that. So it was just a matter of, I had to go from that monster mini band to a micro band, now I'm like a mini band. So I had to regress just the tension that was being used. I didn't have to regress the weight when I'm laying flat on the floor of lifting my arms up. That was fine. It was more with the basically the chest pull, which is like a face pull in the row. It was those that was doing more of the jack. I don't know which it was, because they're all being done at the same time, but that's what I regressed it on. And then those issues kind of went away, and it's in there. Is the range of motion increasing? No, not at this point. It's been a short period of time, but I also had to regress. So that I can say that first week being probably too much is a wash. Like, I don't count that, because that was too much, so moving forward, we'll see how it goes. But that's what essentially changed on that. I plan on taking, this was an interesting one to me. I plan on taking weeks off training in a month, going on vacation. I was planning to work up to a mock meet beforehand. So I'm going to stop right there. I've never been a fan of that, even when I was competing. I was never a fan of going on vacation after a meet, because shit can happen during a meet, which could completely fuck your vacation up. So I understand why people do that, but you tear something, then all of a sudden it's a fucked up vacation. So, but I get what you're talking about there. If it were me personally, I don't know if it would be a mock meet. Now if I'm to leave for a period of time for a vacation, that will definitely, the week before that, be the heaviest week of whatever wave I'm on, and then I'll go from there. But the mock meet, I'm not going to say don't do it, because I don't know the context. I don't know who you are. I don't know these type of things. Sometimes that might want to be reassessed a little bit, but in most cases, no. That's, your decision to kind of make based upon that. That's just kind of how I always saw that. If I was to have some vacation like that, it was usually going to be a month after, and then kind of go from there. I plan to spend 4 to 6 weeks off barbell lifts when I get back, and focusing on building work capacity. Okay, that I kind of agree with, but those 4 to 6 weeks off barbell week would kind of count the time that you're on vacation, because there's no barbell lifts while you're on vacation. So that can kind of trim some of those weeks off of all that. And then focus on building work capacity. I think that you can build work capacity in its general sense, the aerobic capacity, while on vacation, where that's a time where you can increase your steps. And sometimes you do, some people do, some people don't. I purposely would suggest people try to do that, right? Because you're going to typically be someplace else. There's going to be less distractions. It's easier for you to go on walks. It's easier for you to focus on those type of things. I would greatly increase that during that time period. So outside of those two things, then when you come back, building that work capacity is a very general term, but I understand what you're saying. I also plan on ordering a prowler for this phase. The equipment I have access to that isn't a barbell or bands, sandbags, few kettlebells, blast wraps, and stuff like that. You don't necessarily have to have a specific implement to be able to build work capacity. Work capacity can simply be built by training density. So you can, because basically you're going to fall more into a hypertrophy phase, which you can start out with normal rest periods. But if work capacity is what you're trying to develop, then you can shorten the rest periods of everything associated with that training that doesn't require to have a longer rest period. So the work sets are going to probably need a little bit longer rest period, but all those other sets don't. So work capacity is built in training density as well, trying to get more work done in a shorter period of time. So that's one way to do that. Work capacity isn't necessarily built by adding a bunch of other shit on top of what you're doing. The way I would address it first is by changing what the time period that you're already doing to address the increase of the work capacity, right? Work capacity is not endurance, right? Work capacity is a different thing. Work capacity is going to be your obviously your ability to be able to do more work. So that has to also have correspondence to the work that you're talking about being able to do moving into those next phases. So the aerobic conditioning can play into that because that's the recovery base that you have there. But if you're looking at this work capacity as, well, here's the normal stuff I'm already going to do. Now, outside of that, I'm going to do sled work. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Then I don't necessarily know the way that that's structured, if that's going to be the most effective way to be able to increase work capacity. I could see that as a way that could actually decrease work capacity because it's going to tap too hard on your recovery demands to not be able to recover, to be able to progressively increase the work capacity to the point that you need it to be able to move into that next block of training. If you need more elaboration on that, we do have people on the Discord that can go and look into the context that you have and really be able to help with this, because this is essentially just really, really good, efficient, what most people would consider off-season strength and conditioning training. And that's where a lot of people, I think, fuck up the most. There's a lot of people on there that really know what the fuck they're doing there. If I see it, I can help kind of go a little bit more into that. But with that, you also need to know what the base is to be able to provide the context on where to grow it from that base. There's kind of like two questions like this that kind of contradict themselves as I go through here. Would you rather have taken 17 years off your life or be 9 inches shorter? I don't really kind of know how to answer that, because the fact of the matter is the way that I probably lived from the age of 20 to 40 probably did take 15 years off of my life. So if I felt being 9 inches shorter was going to be a benefit to whatever my objectives were at that period of time, then my answer is 100%, because I've already demonstrated I was willing to do that for what my objective was at that time. So yeah, that would be the answer there. The context being, is the 9 inches shorter going to increase the likelihood of me hitting the objective that I was actually working toward? To me, that's a no-brainer. I'm not saying that's a no-brainer for everybody. I'm saying for me, that would be a no-brainer. Elite FTS makes great equipment. Have you guys thought about developing a variety of attachments for your racks geared towards garage gym lifters with limited spacing equipment? Yes, and we actually do have those. That's been one of the frustrations that I've had with e-commerce and the website, is we have every rack attachment you can think of. So we have 2 different type of monolift attachments, from the J-cup type to the sliders. We have a chest supported row type of attachment to actually where the chest pad comes out and you can slide other attachments into what that base is. We have step-up attachments. We have, obviously chin bar attachments. We have, I think, 3 different types of J-cups. We have The fuck do we have? Single leg squat attachments, standing leg curl attachments. We have a neck attachment. We have dip attachments. We have a bilateral leg raise attachment. If you follow Matt Goodwin's Instagram, I believe he has pretty much every one of them in his home gym. If you get a hold of either Matt, Chris, or Nate, so if you go to the website, click on the custom build equipment, or go to the very bottom of the footer of the page and hit, professional ready equipment or custom made equipment or whatever's down there at that bottom link, it will link to how you can get a hold of either one of our sales reps. They can help you with all those attachments. I can't think of a single attachment that's out there that we don't have. We probably even have attachments that nobody else has. The issue is when you go to put something like that on a website, then you have to have a way for people to purchase that on the website to fit every fucking possible attachment and hole spacing that's out there. And then you have to be able to have that be able to communicate it, internally, so we can then communicate it to whomever the manufacturer is that's doing it exactly as what it's supposed to be. That is not just a mess to be able to figure out how to put online. It's also a fucking mess logistically. When you speak to one of the sales reps and they're actually having you measure all this shit and take pictures of that, because we custom built pretty much everything that we make, then it can be custom built for whatever your rack is. So there's options that we've looked into, but I'm still kind of looking into on how to just present. These are the things that we have, which, yes, I do know and understand fully. And it's been a pet peeve of mine for about a year now, because at the very least, we should at least just show the fucking pictures of what they are and then say, call the sales reps. But other things become a priority. We don't have the largest staff in the whole world. So that always seems to fall on the back burner, and our project management software that we use, the rack attachments and the list of rack attachments have actually probably been sitting on that list for, longer than what I want to say is on that list. But then other new items come that get prioritized that we have to put on the site because they're probably going to sell more and they're stocked. So there's what that is. So yes, we do have those. In the podcast with Andrew Locke, you discussed, okay, well, this is a little bit different. So in the podcast with Andrew Locke, you discussed how you would try to prevent low back injuries in your lifting career. What were the specific things that you did? What did you try that you knew didn't work? And did you believe you got the most out of experience? It wasn't just low back. It was when I was coming in up through the sport, even from the very beginning, the gear was not what the gear is now. So it was like single ply squat suits, and they would blow out. You see, and it happened to me several times. You sit in the bottom of a squat and the ass of your suit would blow out. It always made me laugh, because some people just wear a jock strap and there's a fucking ass just right out plain day. So I learned real quick that you need to wear the accepted approved underwear underneath the suit when you did that, because it was a USPF at the time. But I'd also see the injuries, and the injuries that I saw that were the most common were low back injuries, because I would hear the lifters I was training with bitch about it. I'd hear people talk about that at meets. I would hear that being one of the reasons why people didn't power lift. I would hear that being the reasons why they were bench specialists. And I didn't care, or probably didn't even know any better, when I was that young, that in a lot of these cases, it was just probably some bullshit excuse because they didn't want to squat and deadlift and just wanted to bench. I didn't really care about that. I just knew that you fuck your lower back up, it's probably not going to be good for your powerlifting career. The other one were knees, because I'd hear the same thing about knees, but then I would see people, I don't know if it was really the knee per se or quad tendon. You know, it's going back so much. It could have been quad tendon and I thought it was a knee. You know, back then, even if it was quad tendon, they probably said it was still knee. You know, the people that I know that blew a quad tendon, it always kind of got defined as, you know, it was a knee problem. Knees were one of them, and then pec tears were one of them. The summer after my senior year of high school, I strained my right pec the first time on an incline bench press, and I mean it popped hard, but it didn't bruise, it didn't do anything like that. So it's weird, right? Because I didn't become so concerned with the pecs, because at that point I figured, you know what, I've already had that, right? So I just need to do what I can do to try to minimize that. But at the same time, it healed pretty quick. So in a few weeks, I was kind of right back to benching again. So to me, it's like, well, a pec strain isn't really that big of a deal. And I wish I would have paid more attention to what that one was, because of my structure, short pecs, and that ended up being one of the bigger problems and probably led to the shoulder than the other two things, where I wish I would have thought that was more in line with the knees and the back. But I wasn't seeing people tearing pecs that weren't able to still compete, because everybody that I knew that would strain a pec, they were still able to compete. Even if if it was a complete tear, they would still compete. It was like a bicep. Like the tear bicep, to me, it was like, whatever, no big deal. Like it doesn't matter. You tear it, you don't fix it, you just keep going. The pec kind of fell into that category for me. So it wasn't really that much of a concern, just part of the sport. The other three I saw as these can fucking take me out of the sport. So the way that those were approached in my head from that age was, I was going to always try to work. So the strain of my knees was never that hard, that I was always going to sit back. And my original coaches were advocates of sitting back in the squat. Actually, everybody, like a Bridges flare type thing. Everybody through my time starting all the way up to Louis was all about sitting back, vertical shin, everybody. So that kind of, because I saw that seemed to have a correlation, that very few people that were like a Bridges flare, sitting back, Pacifico, that type of thing, they weren't having the same issues as the real close stance when it came to the knees. Now, I wasn't super wide stance either. You know, I was more like a medium stance, and definitely a lot of quad, but not the wide stance that it later became. So that's kind of how I was mitigating that. And then I was mitigating it with making sure my quads were always strong, which became an issue with Louis when I got there, because my quads to him were way too big, and hamstrings not big enough. So that did change then. The way that I mitigated the low back was, I don't know what the technical term is, but there would be a couple of times that I'd throw my back out for whatever. And it was usually stupid shit, like just bending over, doing something, you know, a barn or something, just bending over. It's like, fuck, what was that? You know, then it's hard to walk, it's hard to breathe. So after a couple times of that happening, what I realized was, every time this happens and it's lit up, I was still able to train if I was to put enough blood in it, and to be able to keep, I didn't know what bracing was at the time, but to be able to keep my stomach tight is kind of the way that I would have thought of it back then. To be able to keep my stomach tight, it didn't hurt as much. And if I cranked my belt too tight, it hurt more. So I had to keep the belt like a little bit looser, but keep my stomach tight. And then even when when it was aggravated, it was not aggravated. And then somebody at the time, once it would get better, told me some shit that was the reason why it happens is because I was using my belt too much. So I stopped using my belt for everything except top sets. That may have played some part of all that. But what I think played the bigger part of all that was I realized when it was strained that I didn't bend over the same way I'd squat down to pick shit up, just all the things that you typically know. Certain exercises, I would feel the back differently than others. For instance, an exercise that was popular, really popular back then, was a T-bar row. And so it's kind of like a chest supported row, but without the chest support. I probably had my back pop out on that twice. Then it was like, I'm never fucking doing this again. So anything that made my back feel like that made it felt, which if I was to explain it back then, I wouldn't be able to explain it. The way I would explain it now is if I ever felt like my lower back was being elongated under load, I wasn't going to do it because I knew from exercises like that, shit like that would happen. So that would essentially be it. Is I just kind of learned that indirectly, don't bend over to pick shit up ever, always squat down that way. Cause after a couple of times you become paranoid. Like, well, if I fucking did this the day before I squat, then either my squats are going to hurt like hell or I'm not going to be able to squat. So I'm just going to make sure that that this never happens ever. So then it won't fuck up my squat or my bench. So I'm never going to just bend over. I'm always going to squat down. So that would be some of those mitigating factors from the very beginning. When I got to, say, 15 years then into it and got to West Side, then Louis was obviously Louis. It was super big, on developing the lower back and all the other. So that kind of took that to that next level. So that's the HIIT thing. This is the interesting question, which also plays off the if you could be shorter type question. Back at your peak, would you have traded inches off your dick for 50 more pounds on your total? And how many inches would you have traded, and would you allow it to become negative? Right there. If I was just to read this and say, back at your peak, would you have traded inches off your dick, period, for another 50 pounds on your total, period? Then I would say yes. But you know who you are too. The fucker had to make this more complicated by saying, would I've been willing to go negative? No, I probably wouldn't have been willing to go negative on that. Balls, on the other hand, no problem, because I did make that trade, right? So taking anabolics, my balls ended up being peas. So this question kind of makes the answer to my other question look like it's bullshit, even though it's not bullshit, because this one goes too fucking far by saying, would you have a negative dick? And so no. So I don't know how to answer that because I just got mind fucked when I saw that question there and even this question here. And I've had a week to think about these two questions in relationship to each other, and I'm still mind fucked on it. So I do appreciate that because I like being mind fucked on things because it makes me think a lot. And I'm still trying to figure this one out. So I'm just going to leave it with that. I'm going to say no, but it doesn't agree with what I said earlier. So I'm very fucking confused with myself right now. Okay. Personality aside, why do you think Conjugate is so controversial? And there's several points that are being made in here and how, in a way, Conjugate relates to business as far as the ability to be able to pivot, to be able to do multiple things at one time and so forth. And I think that there's the same reasons why you see the debates that are associated with HIIT apply here. And that would be that what is conjugate? So that becomes the first thing. When something becomes very hard to define, that this is what it is, and then over a period of a time becomes harder to define, this is what it is. Where at its basic level, I would say what a conjugate is coupling of training modalities within the same time period. But that can also be said about block periodization that's actually being structured more correctly than other block periodization. Block periodization is another topic that when Tom Shepard gets here, maybe we'll sit down and we'll really kind of go through this, because it's hard to really talk about block periodization in context, because it's easy to talk about it in context with, say powerlifting, because powerlifting is very simple when you're dealing with program and organization of training. Block periodization isn't necessarily made, it's not made and was created for powerlifting. It was created for sport. It was created for, athletes that have all these different abilities that need to be developed. And some of those abilities, can last longer while not being trained than others. So you have different blocks, you have different time periods, you have different ways that you have to desensitize and resensitize and stay sensitized. So there is a lot of conjugate that's kind of going on in block, but they probably wouldn't say it's conjugate because it is still coupling. So the way that I see conjugate kind of is coupling, but when something is hard to define, and it's like, well, this is West Side Combat, this is winning conjugate, this is tactical conjugate, now you have this clusterfuck of a bunch of different things that nobody can really say what it is, right? So obviously with that is going to come controversy, because there's no clear answer. And when there's no clear answer, there's going to be, different sides. But the fact of the matter is, with any training modality, there never is a clear answer. Right? The clear answer is what's going to work best for the individual that's actually being trained or doing the process. So that's one of the reasons why it becomes controversial. The other reason why it becomes controversial is, just as in with HIIT, there's a lot of advocates that are going to be out there that state that this is the best way. And whenever somebody does that and says this is the best way, but evidence, anecdotal and scientific, shows that's not correct, there's controversy. Because if it was the best, everybody would fucking do it. Same thing with, HIIT. If that was best, everybody would fucking do it. If the effective reps were the absolute best, then everybody would do it. And you would see no success in the people that weren't doing it, which means there has to be other factors involved outside of just that one thing, right? So taking the effective reps, for instance, if you're speaking with, sport training or strength training or whatever, there is workload that is part of that. There is workload that is part of the entire process. It is a metric. It's a metric that over a period of time will increase and decrease. It will be phasic, that kind of plays into that. Workload is going to be those warm-up sets. Your ability to express the intent that's going to be required to be able to do that effective rep is going to take certain things to prime to be ready to actually do that. To dismiss that those things are actually important is bullshit. And that's known. So for everything that I said earlier about HIIT, it also applies here. So that needs to be discussed first. And if it's somebody that is obviously my bias falls there, right? My bias is only going to fall there to the point of whoever I'm trying to help. If they don't have a buy-in or they don't believe in that, then that's not my bias. My bias is, how do we get this fucking person stronger and achieve their objectives in the most effective way possible? Usually that's not going to be spending 4 fucking hours trying to convince them on what my bias is. It's going to be able to what's working, what's what not working, and let's work on what's working. That does not happen in this world of programming and organization and all these other things. It doesn't happen enough. It does happen. I mean, there are those people that they either don't have a bias and that's all about making the person stronger, or they have a bias, they know what it is, but they're not leveraging it to try to impact it where it's not going to be embraced from that. So that's where I think that controversy comes from, right? It's nowhere else. Is when you have people trying to say this is better than this, but then everybody can look and say, well, then how do you explain all this? Then there you go. It's there. So it's a shitty way to sell something if what you're trying to sell is program based. Because the last thing that they're going to be able to do is to say, hey, look, my program's fucking awesome, but so are all these other ones. So positioning becomes marketing positioning becomes part of that whole process. That creates controversy. And I can even come back on that and say that controversy can actually be good from the marketing standpoint, because it's bringing attention to what that is. You know, on the person that's trying to get strong, they have to understand what this really is. You know, it is marketing, it's promotion, sometimes it's ego, but it's marketing, it's promotion, it's, you know, trying to differentiate, I can't say it, trying to separate themselves from, you know, other people, understand that's what that is. But then if they have that base understanding of these are the things that are the most important in a program moving forward, these are the things that have helped me, these are the things that I have holes in, and let's fill those holes, then it won't matter because they're going to see it for what it is. All right, we talked a little bit about competitive powerlifters who are one and done. If you're working with the athlete, what is something that you would do to construct a path for them to compete in more than their first meet? Simple. Their first meet would simply just be a learning experience. The narrative would never be about that. The narrative would be, here's where we are, here's where we want to go, right? These are steps to be able to get to where we want to go. So they want to embark on powerlifting. It could be just as simple as opening up whatever classification system is used today. I know there's many of them. Years ago, it just used to be the USPF, but here's the classification system. And here's, if we were to guess where you are now, say did a mock meet, you're going to fall here, but we really can't put you anywhere because you haven't done a meet. So you're 0. So if we just get one meet under our belt, then we have a base. And then from there, we go here, but here's where we want to be, you know? So now you say a class 0, like class 100, and here's a class 5, you know, I think, you know, with good structured training, you might be able to be like a class 4. So let's work towards that class 4. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to develop some meet experience. So I would never make it about the meet. I would make it about where that class, where you are on that class, which is separate from what the meet is, and then move from there. That way, that first meet just becomes, all right, this isn't really about numbers. This is just getting you used to the experience. of being at the meet, doing these things, seeing what the environment is, getting acclimated to what it is, setting a very, very base level number, which should be pretty easy to beat on your second meet. That way you got real PRs, and kind of move from there. Watching Andrew Locke's work. He was talking about discrepancies in research. Basically, this question is about the pros and cons of education and how important is it with the strength and conditioning world. I believe that we discussed this a little bit on the Discord. It really depends upon a couple things. First thing it's going to depend upon is what you're going to want to do. If you're going to work in a university setting, you're probably going to have a degree, most likely a master's degree, and a CSCS, and maybe the CCA. So there's going to be a couple things that you're not even going to be considered if you don't have that. If it's going to be in a private sector, in a club, then maybe not. I don't know. I've been kind of away from that world for a long time. It used to be that you needed a degree. I don't know if that's so much the case now. And in most cases in today's world, most people that are coming into this field, they're not striving for either one of those. They're striving to be able to do this basically on their own. So if they're striving to do it on their own, then I would say that the degree doesn't mean shit. It's just going to create expense that you don't need. But if the degree is paid for and it doesn't create debt, then I don't see the negative. So there's that. It creates debt, then actually I do see a negative, but it creates debt, it creates more of a negative. There is a negative that, it is 4 less years that you're actually going to be practicing and being associated and doing the actual craft. Now, on the other side, what happens a lot of times is in any skill, when people are told you don't need the degree with this, they don't fucking study at all. They don't try to learn at all. They just spend all their time trying to do an internship, get in under somebody else. And in today's world, it's even more weird than it's ever been in the past. So they want to learn from somebody else, be mentored by somebody else. But in today's world, they want to learn from somebody else, be mentored by somebody else, but also get paid to be able to be trained and mentored by somebody else. So it's a fucked up type of thing, to where most of the people I know now, they're not bringing on fucking interns because they're not going to pay somebody, to teach them everything that they need to know, when there's a whole group of other people that are willing to pay them to be able to come in and be mentored. So it's a different world that's kind of in there now. But the point I'm trying to make is this is what they want to do, but then the way that they want to do their education is highly biased on whatever they think is the easiest way to be able to obtain that education. Watching YouTube videos, watching reels, stuff like that, not looking at whatever the source is. And there's nothing wrong. There's a ton of shit on YouTube. There's a ton of podcasts. There's a ton of things you can learn a lot from. The most important thing that you can learn from all those things are, where did these people learn? How did they learn? And then what resources did they learn from? And then go to those resources and then also study those resources. So don't look at where these people are, look at how they got there, because there still is time that needs to be put into learning the basics of all these things. You don't have to go to university to be able to learn biomechanics, kinesiology, and all this other stuff, but you need to fucking learn it. And that doesn't mean watching one fucking YouTube video on what it is and not retaining a goddamn thing. You have to be able to, first off, watch the YouTube video, then know if that was actually true or not, right? So that's going to take a little extra time. So yes, it can be done. It can be done way more effectively. I know people that have not gone to university, that have only learned all this shit online and through their own practical experience of working with people who are far better at training people and getting people strong and getting people in better shape and getting people better ready for sports than people with fucking PhDs, because they've gone, but they didn't just dick around watching their favorite YouTuber and just replicating what they do. And that's the difference there. So that's where I get a little paranoid when this university is not important type of thing, because what's the alternative? And then when the alternative is put out there, people aren't saying what that alternative is. And then the least of past resistance is what most people are going to take. And those are the people that are going to fail. You know, the people that are going to take the hardest path to resistance are the ones that are going to succeed, but it's a hard fucking path. And they need to be told it's a hard fucking path. And it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of time, and it's a lot of due diligence, putting yourself out there and then building the networks to be associated with those people that can kind of help guide what that is as well. So they're not equal, right? By no means, but you can't just say this is better than this and not have context behind what's going to be done on that alternative, because just going into a Gen Pop health club and getting a job as a snot-nosed trainer, I did that in high school, right? It doesn't teach you a fucking thing. I mean, you're working with Gen Pop people. Somebody might show you how to take them around and show them how to do basic movements. That's only going to get you so far. And you might think, you might think you fucking know everything because you know all the Weider principles. Like, there's nothing else I need to learn about this shit. Well, fuck not. There's a whole lot that you have to be able to learn from all that. So I do think that learning on your own is definitely the best path to go if they know what that actually entails and what that actually means. All right. Where am I at? So there's two more here. Can you list a list of considerations and must-haves for being a super heavyweight? I'm 330. All right. So you're a super heavyweight. You're on the Discord, which is cool because you have other people on there that are super heavyweights. And thank God, they told you that a CPAP actually existed, and keeping your electrolytes up and staying hydrated up matters, so I'm being told here, don't take anything as obvious. That here's what I'm going to tell you is keep asking questions to the other people that are out there, because there's going to be a lot of things of being a super heavyweight that you have to be able to get used to. There's some things that are just going to suck, right? Because you are heavier, but there's a difference between those things that suck that will make you better as a competitor, as a super heavyweight, and those things that suck that are not going to make you better as a super heavyweight. And there's a balance that kind of floats in there. And, health metrics definitely play a role into that. Blood work is going to play a role into that. So the best metrics I could say would be, Marek Health and the blood work and blood pressure. Those type of things are metrics that are going to be in there. You already have people that are helping you now on some of these little basic things. Just lean into that. That's all I'm going to say, because I can sit here and list, and this is why I didn't do it, because I could probably sit here and list 100 different things that you're going to run into, that you're going to deal with and all this, but they don't all happen at the same time. There's going to be a thing here, a thing here, a thing here. Just post it up. Somebody will be able to help you out with it. Like, hey, here's how you can mitigate this, or fuck no, this is a warning sign. Just post it up. Let those guys help you out. Let us help you out. You're solid, man. You're good. You're actually better than good, because now you recognize that there's certain things that can actually be mitigated where you didn't think it had to be mitigated before. I mean, sleeping in a recliner, and you're not the only one. Let me put that out there right away. You're not the only one. I know a lot of people that slept in a recliner for years, because they couldn't breathe if they slept on their back. A CPAP could have definitely been the answer to all that. All right, the last one. All right, I have some shoulder issues from work that I have trained and even competed around. My doctor wants to perform a shoulder replacement, and I'm getting a second opinion. Yes. should get a second opinion. They paint the picture that I'll be able to resume everything I do now. That's bullshit. I kind of feel like they want to rape workman's comp insurance and don't want to discuss other options. Could be true. Most likely could be true. Do you know of anyone that has come back and lifted heavy weights from a shoulder replacement? No. That's why I've gone close to 2 decades without having a shoulder replacement. A shoulder replacement is no joke. Actually, any joint replacement is no joke. But the reason why I went with the hip replacement is because I couldn't live like that, first off. And then the second thing was the success rate for how it was going to impact my life and what I wanted to do fell within my range of, I can live with that. I'm cool with that. I can still do everything I really want to do with that. So that seems to be more true with the hips than others. Then the knees kind of fall in there kind of like in second place, the shoulders in like in a vast third place. So no, I don't. And I've looked and I've had people tell me, well, I know this person, but then that person that ends up not necessarily being the truth, or when I actually find out about that person, it's not exactly what was presented. So yes, get a second opinion, third opinion, see how you can mitigate it, kind of go from there. All right, guys, this is the end of this Crewcast. Again, thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for supporting the podcast, and we're done.
I think it's good just to kind of face back and treat yourself like close to a natural athlete so you can appreciate the diet and the training modalities and rhythm and volume and intensity again. Because when you're on, you kind of lose touch with that, or at least a lot of athletes, unless they're under good guidance of a coach. And even then, they have the coach to guide them because themselves, it's very hard to do it yourself.